Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to show you how to replace your timing chains on an N54 powered BMW. Alright guys, before we get started, I want to let you know that this video is part of a series where I also remove the camshafts and cam trays. I'll put a link in the description so you guys can catch up to where I start in this video. I had to lock the cams using a specialty tool which I'll link below. Given my car has a single mass flywheel, I wasn't able to lock the flywheel using a conventional locking pin that would normally go through the block. I had to use another specialty tool. Now regardless, I recommend that tool because it's the only proper way to hold the flywheel when removing the crank hub. You're not supposed to just rely on the locking pin that goes through the block to deal with all the pressure of removing the front crank bolt because it's under a tremendous amount of pressure. Now, as you can see, the front plug that covers the oil pump chain or the vacuum pump chain is already being removed. So I'll have to link to another video where I show that. And then I have a pretty thorough DIY on how to remove the valve cover gasket. So between all the videos I'm going to link in the description, you should have all the information you need to catch up to where we are in this video. And you'll be at the point where we're ready to lock the cams. And after you lock the cams, you got to remove the phasers and remove the 16mm bolt that holds the Vanos units in place. In this video, I'm going to show you to replace both the timing chain and the oil pump chain with new guides. Technically, you could avoid dropping the pan if you're just doing the main chain, but I'd recommend you do both the oil pump chain and guides along with the main chain because the main focus is actually on the oil pump chain anyway. It's more likely to fail from experience. I'm going to link to a video where I drop the pan as well, and we'll be all up to speed. Now it's time to lock the crank hub. I have my floor jack underneath so that can turn. Now we'll go ahead and remove that bolt. So this isn't the best shot in the world, but hopefully it gives you an idea. This is supposed to be kind of insanely tight. Okay, so as you saw, that took some decent effort. I used a jack handle and I used a breaker bar on a 22 impact socket to get this bolt free. This bolt's one-time use, I bought a new one. Now's a good time to get that crank seal removed. Okay, so I can tell you without a doubt that you're going to need a seal removal tool. There's no way you're going to be able to do this without the seal removal tool. I tried and I don't recommend it. So I'll put a link in the description. As you can see, it's made specifically for the N54 and it goes for about 60 bucks. Where the bed plate meets the block, there is a little line where you have to put silicone on the corners here to ensure a proper seal. You can also use the special bed plate sealant that you would normally use. So you put this in dry and then you insert the bed plate sealant on the side of the block, push it all the way through, but you'd only really do that on a rebuild. If you're just changing your crank seal, you're just going to be putting a little bit of silicone here. BMW sells a special primer and a special sealant and all that. I heard reports of that not working out too well for some people because the age of the sealant is very important. I'm going to go the old school route and I'm going to use some gray RTV. Some of you guys may frown upon that. I'm just going to coat the whole seal to help lubricate it and get it into place, as well as fill in these voids here. So I'll show you that now. So you're supposed to line these up with the lines on the block, and then you can start to drive it in using the seal tool. Now what I can do is get it started, and then I can remove the crank hub altogether and be able to hammer it in pretty clearly. So we'll try that. So normally you wouldn't want to put too much of this stuff because it could squeeze into the block and then get picked up by your oil pickup tube. But I still have my hand drop, so I can just go from the backside and wipe any excess, which makes things a little easier. Normally you need a special seal driver tool if you want to be able to insert this back into the block while your crank hub is still in place, and if you're not doing this major job that I'm doing. But since I can remove the crank hub and tap it into place and use it to initially guide things in place, I can save a few hundred, actually a couple $100 on a full seal driver tool. All I needed was a seal removal tool. So I'm gonna smear some all the way around. Trust me, I know some people frown upon that because you can actually make things worse, but in this case I'm confident with it and I can wipe away any excess. But I filled in those little divots. Now I'll go around the whole thing. If anybody lost some respect for me after watching me do this, fair enough. You know, technically if you install this by the book, you don't really need too much sealant, but this just has always worked well for me. It helps drive the seal in place, offer some lubrication on the way in, and it fills any voids. So that looks and feels good. It's pretty much flush. When you use the seal driver tool, it pushes it in by about 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter. So it pretty much feels like it's about there. On the back end, it would stick in a little bit. If you were to use the original seal driver tool, it would pretty much make it dead level and maybe like a 0.5 mil in, but this should be fine. The seal doesn't protrude at all, so we're in good shape there. I'm going to put some oil on this just so it's lubricated for when we insert the crank hub later. So you don't need the special tool for driving it in. That's what costs a lot of money, but you need that tool to remove it. I tried for quite a while. It wasn't going to work. You wouldn't be able to tell that I didn't do it the OEM way now that I wiped away all that excess silicone. Nothing really pushed behind it anyway. So I'm content with that. I'm removing these access bolts. There's some plugs on the front of the block that are covering the access holes for the timing equipment. That's the T45 down there. The bottom chainrail guide bolt is torqued to 20 Newton meters. This upper one's 14. 25 on the plug. So unfortunately I didn't realize my camera wasn't rolling, but I just stuck the oil pump timing chain module up in place, and then I inserted the one bolt in the center here to get things started. Now I'm going to stick on this sprocket. So I inserted the grip disc washer on the crank hub, making sure this is all dry. I got the crank hub installed. I got the oil pump chain guide in place just loosely. We'll do a final tighten on all 3 bolts once we have the oil pump back in place, and then we'll lock the crank and do the crazy 360-degree rotation of this stretch bolt after we've locked the timing up above. So as an FYI, I just stuck the chain and the Vanos gears on to hold everything up while I inserted the crank hub. That made things line up as it should. That's how everything looks. You wouldn't really know that I used RTV. Now I'm going to set up the tool to tighten down the crank hub bolt. Okay, so I have the tool holding it. I'm going to torque this to 100 Newton meters first of all. So I have set a mark on the crankshaft and the tool so I can rotate this 360 degrees all the way around. When it comes back around, we're at full tightness after 100 foot-pounds of initial torque. But it's taking a lot of effort. Feels like I should be using my breaker bar now. I don't want to break my ratchet. We got it. It actually isn't so bad. It takes a lot of effort, but then you get a consistent amount of torque as it's stretching. So I definitely felt it stretch, and then near the end of the stretch, it starts to get hard again. So I know that it's torqued properly. So we just have the crank tool. So as you can see, the tool comes down and just rests on the jack like that. I'm going to retighten this. So there's a special tool to release this nut. I talked about it in the previous video. But I'm ready to torque it now, and I'm just inserting a short extension in there, which will catch one of the heavy screws in the backside. So, it's not the proper way, but this should work. We talked about saving money on specialty tools where possible. You're supposed to oil the bolt, so I put some motor oil on there and torque it to 66 Newton meters. It's a T55. Easy enough and didn't damage anything. That's torqued to 66. Now I'm bringing over the plug. There you go, seal's installed. Not the most elegant way, but it worked. You gotta torque it to 10 Newton meters, 90 degrees on these. Shorter ones. So the long bolt goes to 180 degrees. These shorter ones go to 90. So this goes to 20 Newton meters plus 45 degrees of angle. These 3 bolts here get torqued to 4 Newton meters and then an additional 45 degrees of angle. And there's 3 of them. They're E10s. Doing these at 4 and then 45 degrees. So my torque wrench wouldn't go below 6.8 Newton meters, so I didn't really trust it. I'm going by feel. But yeah, I just went to the point where it feels like it's stretching and then it feels like it's just about to start tightening back up again. I just did that by feel, but I'm confident in it, so that's tight now. All right, now it's time to lock the Vanos gears. By the way, I've already tightened these two E8 bolts. Now I'm going to take this tool, thread it into the block, and we're going to set some initial tension on the chain. Basically finger tight. You can see the tool in there. Got rid of all the slack in this chain. Now we're going to torque these bolts to 20 Newton meters and then 180 degrees. That worked out to about 67 Newton meters. I'm going to install the new tensioner with a new washer. Hit my 30-minute limit, but I just torqued the tensioner bolt down with an adjustable wrench. So we set chain tension. So I'm going to go down underneath the car and remove my locking tool that I installed. And I'm also going to rotate the engine twice, see if everything realigns. I have my two timing marks lined up perfectly down below. And we're right on the money. These fell straight in, this goes straight in, and I'll show you the marks below. As you can see, those are lined up. And we're on the money here. So we're in time, good to go. So I'm just going to time lapse through me putting the rest of the accessories on. The vibration dampener, 6 E10 bolts, get torqued to 35 Newton meters. Torquing the idler pulley to 40 Newton meters. Putting that in place for when we have the power steering pump back in position. So the rest happens from below. I'm going around the perimeter of the pan and torquing all the bolts to 8 Newton meters, and then the short bolts are going to get twisted 60 degrees further, and the longer bolts are going to get twisted 180 degrees. Alright, so I just put the belt on, and I'm going to go ahead and put the valve cover back on. I'm not going to show that in detail because I have another video on my channel where I did that in detail, so I can just reference that in the description. And we'll catch up when I'm putting the subframe back. Alright guys, I'm going to reinstall the subframe now. I have another video on my channel where I show that in detail, so I'll just put a link in the description for that. Alright, fingers crossed. Hopefully this goes well. It's super smooth. Alright guys, that'll conclude this series where I showed you how to replace your cam trays, camshafts, timing chains, rod bearings, oil pan gasket, etc. If this is the first video you're catching of mine, please consider subscribing. I do upload regularly. Thanks for watching.